If it was Lance Lynn's last start as a Cardinal, what a way to go out. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Morning hours of Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. Cardinals get the win over the Pirates last night at Busch Stadium, continuing their series against Pittsburgh in effective fashion. 3-1, the Cardinals win, and the storyline of the night, Lance Lynn, who pitched another strong outing for St. Louis, his second since returning from the injured list, but that might be second and final, as the indications from the ballpark after Tuesday's game seem to be that Lance Lynn could be done for 2024. He made the comment after the game, reading this from Katie Woo's story, that if this is my last start as a Cardinal, I'd like it to be in St. Louis, Lynn said with a smile. So that sort of seems like we could be getting the post-mortem vibe on his 2024 season. And, of course, we don't know what next year's going to bring, whether at age 37 he's going to want to come back again. He does have the team option, but with the direction that it seems like the payroll could be going, Cardinals could be looking to cut some costs, and that could impact a guy like Lance Lynn, who's largely been what the Cardinals bargained for this year, I think, when they signed him in the offseason, and a lot being made of his veteran presence throughout the year. Didn't maybe log the number of innings you were hoping to see, but dealt with injuries, so that's the reason for that. But ultimately, Lance Lynn, an ERA in the mid to high threes, and gave you everything you had. That's really what it boils down to. The reasoning, it might seem a little bit strange. He came off the injured list, and you're saying, okay, there's still a couple of weeks left of season, and really if they were on a five-man rotation turn, you could have Lance Lynn pitch even one more time at Busch Stadium if you wanted to, which, of course, they haven't really been on a five-man turn. They've got six that they're sort of working with ever since Lance Lynn came back. It's always a little bit tenuous. They've also, I think, got Michael McGreevy waiting in the wings, that getting him some opportunities we've said would be really beneficial to this team. And the Cardinals aren't making the playoffs. It's just mathematically an impossibility at this point. Not technically, but basically is. Even winning out for the rest of the season at this point, with however many games remain, probably puts the Cardinals on the outside looking in, and it's a long road trip coming up after the homestand wraps up on Sunday. Now, that would technically be 4 days of rest and on turn for a normal start for Lance Lynn, but with all the injuries he's gone through, the knee, I think, has been something bothering him all season, and if you're kind of reading between the lines on the way that it's being reported on and the vibe from last night, I wasn't at the stadium, planning to go down there on Wednesday night, it just seems as though that could have been it for Lance Lynn. 6 innings of one-run baseball with 5 strikeouts as he holds the Pirates down in another game where the Cardinals don't do a ton offensively. They do enough, and it's coming from some sources that should make you feel better about the future. Jordan Walker, his 4th home run of the season, was a nuke out toward the left field bullpen. And how about Luken Baker, his first triple as a big leaguer? I believe just his second professional triple, dating all the way back to when he was down in Palm Beach a number of years ago. Ball that Brian Reynolds in left field thought he caught, and I think that's the only reason you're able to have the triple. But as Ricky Horton said on the radio broadcast, you can't get a triple unless you think you can. And Luken Baker thought he could, noticing in left field that Brian Reynolds was kind of taking some time to get to that ball. And he had a swim move, sort of evasive maneuvers, slide into third base. How about that for Luken Baker, who is hitting 188? Like, it's not that he's put together a great big league batting average, but the OPS at 786, by virtue of the power and the plate discipline that Luken Baker has shown. He's had some walks as well. I don't know. I think there is something there. I just don't know the direction the Cardinals are going to go. That's such a huge topic of conversation as it pertains to next year. You can look across the diamond. All right, what do you want to do with first base? Paul Goldschmidt, is he coming back? What's the plan? Is it as a part-time player? Can you afford what it's going to cost? Do you want to go multi-years with a guy that has really declined this season? If you're letting Goldie walk off into the sunset, do you go with Burleson and Luken Baker as a platoon? Is that enough to really have the thump you need at first base? Luken Baker's got the 786 OPS in limited duty. Burleson's OPS is down to 746. That's not really elite production for what you'd want to see from a first baseman offensively. Used to be first baseman would be one of your most productive guys on the field offensively in your lineup. And it's kind of times have changed from that it doesn't have to be that way. But ideally, you're having a big bopper over there and providing some mainstay production in your lineup, regardless of who it is in that spot. You want a big slugger at first. That's ideal. And so what do the Cardinals do there? Second base is a huge question. So JC's been getting some opportunities down the stretch. I don't know if he's going to be ready to be an everyday big leaguer at the beginning of next season. He's kind of struggled. He's got a 148 average with a 407 OPS, so you're not penciling him in necessarily. But we know Donovan is probably part of the present and future. He's been playing left field this year, but as you usher Jordan Walker in, as you have Nootbaar presumably out there, as it's going to be Siani or Victor Scott, you think, in center field, how do they want to handle that situation? Does Burleson play some outfield? It does end up being a pretty crowded deck, and how do you want to handle all of those guys that are in your outfield? Is there room for Donovan? And if there's not, what happens with Nolan Gorman if Donovan or Saggese is getting time at second base? Shortstop is really the one spot that you feel pretty stable with Mason Wynn coming back. I think Arenado is going to be back at third base, but stranger things have happened. But yeah, other than those two spots on the left side of your infield, and the catcher position, I think, is largely accounted for with Wilson Contreras. He'll be back. His season's over this year due to the finger injury, but he'll be back. And then the backup catcher, I mean, they have really liked Pedro Pajes. They haven't really given Ivan Herrera much of a shot. What does that maybe foretell as far as what's going to happen next year? A lot of decisions, is my point, that are going to be made about this Cardinals offense, the lineup, and just the bench construction and all of it. And who fits where is going to be an interesting topic of conversation when you go up and down the line on this thing. So it is kind of interesting to see the way that the Cardinals are handling things down the stretch. But Luke and Baker having some success, and Jordan Walker in particular having a little success, is really what you want to see, because I don't think this Cardinals team contends in 2025 without some of the guys. And like, this might not be a great recipe for success, but without some of the guys that you had planned on being strong contenders and contributors this year, they would have to bounce back and do it next year. This Cardinals team is probably a little bit stuck in the mud. I think there will be movement made in the offseason because, again, I think you've got more guys than spots in the everyday lineup, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to make trades, because we know injuries happen. They happen a lot. And then you're left scrambling if your organizational depth is not what it needs to be. But you've got a lot of guys that you thought were part of the next up-and-coming crew, and they can't all play at once necessarily. So who's got trade value? Who do you want to put your weight behind? These are some of the questions the Cardinals are going to have to ask. But to me, because of the struggles Jordan Walker has had in 2024, he's not on that list of guys that can be traded. Because if you're doing it, you're just trading him at such a discount that the other team is going to say thank you. They'll probably leave you a tip. Yeah, I just don't think you can do that. Jordan Walker is somebody that you have to basically sink or swim with, in my opinion. And you don't do that by sending him back to AAA next year. He's in your lineup every day. Like, the next year just has to be a year where the Cardinals find out what they have in guys and they allow them to play through some struggles and come what may. And that may not, that could result in a tough season, but I think it's also the only way forward to find out organizationally, what do you have and what do you need? Because 2025, while it may be a step back in payroll, I don't think 2026 and beyond should be. By then, you hopefully have more clarity on Bally Sports Midwest, what's going to happen with the TV contracts. You have money that's come off the books, and hopefully then an organizational plan of how to use it and how to move forward as a baseball market that's not one of the largest markets, but it has one of the most rabid fan bases. And I do think, even though attendance has declined down at the end of the season, they'll be back. Beginning of next season, you don't think they're going to be sold out opening day? Like, Cardinals fans are going to support if there is a plan coming from this organization in the offseason of what they're looking to do to get things back on the right track, even if it's not immediate. I do think that Cardinals fans will support it. Let me know in the comments if you agree with that. But I think Cardinals fans are willing to support a plan that makes sense. And that could mean a little bit more leaning toward lesser-known internal options in a year where, hey, we've seen what it looks like twice in a row to try and supplement with big-priced or medium-priced free agents, honestly. Like, outside of Sonny Gray, I mean, he's kind of a big price, big-ticket item. Wilson Contreras, he was kind of a big-ticket item. But a lot of the other kind of complementary moves, those were costly. Those were costly without being big-ticket items. And I don't know that again, we're talking about Lance Lynn, we're talking about Kyle Gibson. These guys have done their job. But, like, for what you spent and what it cost you opportunity cost-wise, you had to do it because you were trying to win this year. And now that it hasn't worked out and you've been swimming upstream for 2 years in a row, could the Cardinals kind of zig where they normally tend to zag and say, you know what, maybe we should look at a Michael McGreevy, because we did draft the guy, right? We did draft these players that are in AAA and they're kind of stuck, and we are keeping them stuck we're making it so they can't exactly spread their wings because of this notion of getting 2% better. Well, we think Lance Lynn is going to be more stable than one of those guys. So it didn't get him anywhere. The 2% better got him back to 500. They're going to win 82 games this year instead of 71. But Cardinals fans aren't satisfied with that because he didn't make the playoffs. So while I think their plan was to make sure the bottom didn't drop out of this season, they accomplished it. But a lot of Cardinals fans pointed out before the season began, just having the bottom not drop out isn't necessarily going to get you back into October unless the division falls back to you. And we thought it might. The Brewers, when they traded Corbin Burns, everybody said, the Brewers are going to be not the same anymore. I thought the Brewers weren't going to be the same anymore, and I was wrong. The Cardinals had a good enough team to be competent, to be competitive-ish. They weren't an embarrassment like they were last year, but what has that gotten them? Not really a lot, and a declining attendance. So I think the way that you allow for fans to be reinvigorated is to tell them, look, we're not saying this isn't the 2025, we're not going to look to contend. We're going to go out there and put a good product on the field, but you're going to learn about some guys too. And in the long run, that might benefit the organization. Rather than take the Randy Arozarenas and the Sandy Alcantaras and the Zach Gallons and those type of guys to say, throw it all toward one or two pieces that we think are going to really help us. And maybe Arozarena is a bad comp because they knew that Liberatore wasn't immediately going to be into the rotation. That was they tried to make a move they thought would be savvy by getting a future frontline starter, and he just hasn't turned into that. But when I think about the Ozuna trade, it's a perfect example. They had a hole in their lineup. They felt like they had to get something to fill it. That's why they didn't get Christian Yelich. They wouldn't wait for Christian Yelich to become available. They weren't willing to be patient. They had to get somebody so they could kind of put him on a dolly and wheel him out in front of the fan base and say, see, we did it. You guys can still buy tickets. Be excited. Marcell Ozuna, he hit a bunch of homers last year for the Marlins. Come and support this team. That was kind of the way they have operated for years and years and years. Kind of did it with the Wilson Contreras thing, and some of those moves work out. Like Wilson Contreras is a good player, good teammate, good guy in the clubhouse, good guy to have as an ambassador of the organization. No doubt about all those things. But it's sort of been their modus operandi to, hey, you got a hole, you got to spend to fill it, you got to make a splashy trade to fill it. But even if it's kind of like you're settling, right? Did they want maybe a Sean Murphy, but they said, well, that's too difficult. Let's go ahead and spend money on Contreras. Did they want Christian Yelich, but they were told he wasn't available? Well, we told the fan base we'd get an outfielder or a big bat, so we have to go get somebody. But then they don't go above and beyond to do the next 2 or 3 moves to make it a true contender, and you kind of are left wanting. You're left going, oh, man, we had a half measure baked into this, and it wasn't enough to get us over the hump, and now we've got buyer's remorse. Now we regret the move. I don't think they regret taking their shot on Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson this year, but it was limited upside, and it with a declining offense, and that's another thing they have to figure out. I do think you can't go back into next year with the same coaching staff. Look, I'm sure Turner Ward's a nice guy. What if you're going to evaluate his last 2 years as the coach of the offense? What do you evaluate on other than the results? I just don't really know how you can go through with the same hitting staff next year and say that. And again, this isn't anything personal, but I mean, we're just looking at the numbers for 2 years. I think the offense held the Cardinals back. Their performance with runners in scoring position held the Cardinals back. I think the players have to take responsibility for that and have to be accountable to that, but the coaches do too. That's why they're there, is to put the players in the best position to take those good plate approaches and to be able to get over the hump in those regards. So those are all things that I think are going to have to be evaluated and probably already are being evaluated behind the scenes. And then this offseason, we'll find out what's going to happen on those fronts. But yeah, that's sort of the direction that I see this. Who are your internal options that are former prospects, that are current prospects, that are guys that are on the rise? Are they going to rise up, or are you going to have a generation of players, and I'm really speaking offensively, but it applies to the pitchers as well, just sort of flame out and not really reach the potential that we thought they had? Maybe this is their potential, and they're all just 750 OPS, and they're solid guys. Is there a star among this group that the Cardinals are going to throw their weight behind, and then that guy's going to put in the work to turn himself into that? Because collectively across the board, you've got a bunch of solid players, but if a couple of them underperform, then you're like, well, we're a 500 team. You got some solid pitchers, but you're a 500 team. Where do the Cardinals find an edge And do they have the patience to acknowledge that it might have to come from giving a longer look to some of the guys that the archetype of a Michael McGreevy in the past was, just kind of keep him in AAA until you're done with him and let him go, and then maybe see if he has an opportunity elsewhere, because you don't trust him to fill a rotation spot for 30 games. That's how you felt about Andre Palante as well. Let him be a reliever. He can fill a niche role, maybe not the best thing for his development, but let him be a reliever because we might need a ground ball to get us out of a sixth-inning jam a couple of times a week. All right, that really wasn't working out, so they're like, well, he's not good at that. Let's send him down. And then there's some collaboration. To the Cardinals' credit, to Palante's credit, they say, hey, this is what you got to do to be able to make it as a starter. And lo and behold, that ends up helping the organization move forward. Now I think he's a very strong option for 2025 to be part of their rotation from day one. So see that play out, realize that it worked pretty well, and maybe think, how can we build into other guys that are in similar crossroads of their careers? Make sure we pick the right ones who have the mentality, because as Palante did it himself, right? He had the mentality of, I cannot stall out the way I'm stalling out as a quad A player. Not a great big league pitcher, not a great AAA pitcher as a reliever. Okay, I need to take control of my career. Let's do this, that, and the other, and now I'm a guy who's viable at the big league level and a very valuable role to the team. How many other guys in the organization can the Cardinals do that with, instead of say, I don't know that Lance Lynn has, number one in the rotation upside, but we know what he is. We know he's reliable. We know if he's healthy, he'll give us everything he's got. And even then, even if he's not healthy, he'll still give us everything he's got. He's going to take the ball. He knows what that looks like. He's a veteran. He's not going to break down. That's what they did this year. And it got them probably 10 or 11 extra wins compared to last year. But it also got them the same result in October. You're not going. You're not playing then. So let me know how you guys see this. I think it's so fascinating because I don't have the right answers. I don't think there are obvious ones. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy to say, oh yeah, well, Burleson is obviously the guy that you back, but obviously you have to dump Luke and Baker because he's just, he's not a long-term option. And really, you just know that Gorman's not going to come back and ever be able to materialize again at the big league level. So you got to get rid of him, but you got to keep Nootbaar. Like, I could say the opposite. I could say, well, Nootbaar has injuries and is really, he's been solid, but he's never elevated to the star level you thought, and so he might be worth more in a trade. Whereas you can't get rid of a Gorman. He's got 40 home run potential. Like, you could make arguments on either side. You could make the bull case or the bear case on any of these players, in my opinion. The Cardinals are historically inclined to like their internal options because why wouldn't you? They're your players. But that's why it might take somebody with an outside perspective like a Chaim Bloom to come in and say, look, here's how y'all see this guy, but this guy might be more useful to the organization via trade, or he might be more useful in whatever capacity. Some hard decisions to be made about players that everybody likes. Because I'm not going to single anybody out because it's a collective effort that just fell a little bit short this year. But if that's the case, you can't then just come back with the exact same group next year unless you change something. Maybe changing a hitting coach is enough, and they say, no, we like these guys. We're going to be stubborn about it. They could be rewarded for that stubbornness. I just got done saying that past iterations of the Cardinals, their problem at times was kind of counting a guy out before they ever saw him, like in a Rosarena, like a Sandy Alcantara, like a Gallen. Certainly did it with Gallen. I mean, Mo has even said, yeah, Gallen wasn't really that guy when we had him. We didn't really see that from him. Like, all right, is that Gallen that he wasn't taking his career seriously at the time, or was that Cardinals being too dismissive of a young player because they thought they knew what he was? Right? Like, you could make the argument in either way, and we'll maybe never know the full truth other than what gets said publicly, and that's not always the full story either. But when it comes to a guy like Luke and Baker, I know the Cardinals were dismissive of him. I know the Cardinals were like, yeah, okay, we kind of think we know what we've got in Luke. They kind of felt like they knew. And maybe they were right. Look, he's only hitting 188, so maybe this is just, they're like, he's a slugger that's going to be a AAA guy that doesn't play a position. They didn't think of him highly from my tea leaf reading that I've done over the course of the last couple of years. They kind of like, yeah, he's around, not a real option. But now that you're, out of the race, they're giving him a look because this offseason is DFA him, make room on the 40-man, or he's got to be on your team next year. Like, it's kind of getting to be decision time on that. So they're getting a look at him. He does some fun things. He could be just a big-time, 210 hitter, but a guy who bops home runs and can hit lefties and can take a tough at-bat off the bench. Don't dismiss that when you've been willing to roster guys like Carp and guys like Brandon Crawford all year. Like, they're Sometimes you can do that with a non-veteran, and it allows team. It's not to knock those guys, especially Carp, who I think has filled the role that they asked of him. It's just maybe they set their sights too low this year. They set their sights on not having a losing season where he lost 90 games, and they accomplished that. But maybe that left a lot of room for ceiling that they just didn't have on this roster. Because when you have a Carp, you know what he's going to give you, and it's been solid production, but it's also like a little bit limited in terms of the role. Crawford, absolutely. He did not give you solid production, and he was very limited, and you kept him on the team for too long because you're afraid to cut bait on something that was a decision that didn't work out, and you spent $2 million on. Took him too long to do it. So these are the kinds of, I think, bold decision-making that the Cardinals they've been a little tentative in their decision-making in recent years, and I think it's going to need to be an offseason where they make some bold calls, and I'm going to do my best to don't criticize. Don't jump on the offseason moves if they make them. And everybody's going to have opinions, and we'll have opinions too on this YouTube channel. But I also think if I'm sitting here saying today, hey, whoever's in charge of decision-making, they've got to be a little more bold this offseason. Choose their lot in life. Choose the guys that they're going to throw their weight behind and then see it play out with a little bit of patience in 2025. Without the attitude of, hey, if they don't win this year, everybody's head's got to roll. Because I think if any heads are going to be rolling or if any organizational shift is going to happen, it should be happening within the next 4 weeks. Whether it does or not, we'll see. I think there will be shift, though. Gary LaRocque retiring. Chaim Bloom is going to rise in prominence, whether that's to take over for LaRocque or to then be ushered in to take over for Mo. One of those two things I think is going to happen. There's going to be some moves. Those decisions are already being formulated behind the scenes. There's going to be some outside folks maybe brought in, right? So, like, if those moves are made, if the shakeup happens, even if it's not as grand of a shakeup as you want, because everybody wants Mo to be fired, he's not going to be. So, when that doesn't happen, don't say, oh, this is it. This is all they did. I mean, be a little bit fair and let's see what plays out. But certainly a season where you fell short of expectations this year for the second year in a row should inspire the Cardinals to be active in the offseason. That doesn't mean you got to spend big and throw money at the problem, because the way they spent their money, I think, has left them a little bit boxed in with how 2024 panned out. So we'll see. We'll see the way that this plays out. We started talking about Lance Lynn. We kind of ended up talking about big picture stuff, which is going to be a huge theme of the offseason. You want to see Lance Lynn back next year? I think you might have seen him for the final time as a Cardinal, though. I don't think he's taking a West Coast road trip dealing with the knee. He's going to go home. and they're going to get a look at Michael McGreevy in a season that they're no longer vying for postseason contention. So whether he gets to start on Sunday, I think you ended on a high note, kind of like Wainwright did. I don't know if Lance Lynn's done in baseball. He may just need to rehab the knee thing and come back strong next year. That'll depend upon what he wants. But it seems like if you're reading the stories from last night at Busch, that might have been it for Lance Lynn. Let me know what you guys think about that and how you reflect on his season. Make sure to hit the subscribe button for Cardinals content all season and off season long, as it's about to ramp back up again. We're about to see where this Cardinals organization is going to head after a season where they fell a little bit short of expectations. That, though, is going to do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Appreciate you guys as always, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.